Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today it's time to continue our discussion on Vampire the Masquerade, from the World of Darkness. So today I'm going to go over some questions which you can answer to help develop the character to, well, your character. This is like not all the questions that can be asked, but this is a bunch that are put into the book, which are pretty good to answer. Answering these are going to help develop how your character is going to act, react. You're going to know a little bit more about what kind of person or being your character is when you're finished answering these. Now again, your storyteller, he or she could give a different list or give other suggestions for more questions, or maybe not want certain questions answered out of this list. Now after I finish with this list, I will start going over some basic rules. But let's dive into the list itself. So the first question is, how old are you? Now this is a combination of like how old you are overall and how old you appear. It kind of says, how old were you when you were embraced, when you became a vampire? And then how long has it been since then? So you get this entire thing of what your age is in this world. It's a good starting point to work on. After that is, what was unique about your childhood? This tells you sort of some of the things that happened in your younger years to help develop the character that you are. That's also a very good way of defining who you are as a character, is sort of looking at your earlier years. What kind of person were you? This tells you like what kind of person you were before you were embraced. That's really the question. It's like what kind of person you had been before you became a vampire. Because becoming a vampire, it can change you. Sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst, but it can affect you. So you kind of have to find what kind of person you were in those earlier years when you were human. So next one is, when was the first time you met a vampire? This is a combination of, was it when you were embraced? Did you know your sire beforehand? Did you know another vampire that maybe you didn't know they were a vampire until you were embraced? Or perhaps you did know and learn about a vampire beforehand, and maybe that's why you were embraced. It's a combination of all these little questions that tells you sort of what your experience pre-becoming a vampire was with vampire. Now the next question is, did the embrace change you? This kind of goes with the question of what kind of person you were. This is what kind of person you are now, how the embrace has changed you, what kind of character you've become. After that is, who was your sire? This is like questioning what kind of person was your sire, what kind of position they were in, did they have any kind of power, all these little questions about defining what your character, what your sire was. And again, since you might not have any sort of relation with your sire now, your sire might be dead, it's up to you to develop how these things work together when you're coming up with your sire. Now, working off of that one, how did your sire treat you? Did your sire treat you with kindness, with contempt, with, you know, a cruel sort of, you know, pushing a lion cub down a mountain sort of attitude? It's a good question about how your relationship with the first vampire you really got to know was, you know, because your sire is most likely the vampire that you first really got to know, and defining your relationship with your sire might define how you treat relationships with other vampires. Kind of working after that, were you presented to the prince? This is a good one. Most times you need a prince's permission to embrace another into becoming a vampire, to sire one. Granted, it's not all the time, and it happens by accident. The point being, were you presented to the prince in a manner that, you know, were you embraced by vampire society or were you rebuked by it? It kind of gets into the question of how you react to some of vampire society and how you think it treats you. Now after that is, did you meet any other vampires from your blood? This gets into talking about, do you know of like your sire's sire, or your sire, do you know of any of the other vampires he or she may have embraced? You know, so you're directly related through the blood, through the vampiric blood coursing through you, and do you know any of these folks? Because it's not necessarily because of the blood you're not really going to have a relationship, but maybe you could. It could be an excuse to have some of these characters that may or may not be, you know, your connections. And again, some of these questions are developing into things from your backgrounds. You know, when we're talking about, you know, maybe you know others from your bloodline, those could be contacts you know for whatever reason. Or they could be hinting at other relationships you have within vampire society, that sort of thing. That you can develop these a little more outside of being in that background. Now next is, where is your haven? Or what is your haven? Both of these questions work together. Your haven is a place where it's your base of operations. It's your home. It's the place you feel safe to rest at. The question is, what is it? Is it a house? Is it an abandoned factory? Is it, you know, a graveyard? Is it a part of a sewer system? It could be any sort of thing, any kind of territory, whether it's a structure in itself or an area around a structure where you feel at home for whatever reason. It's your haven. It's your, again, base of operations. Now, do you have habitual feeding habits? Whether this be a certain area you feed in, or a certain type of person, or a certain class of person, all these little details about what you would feed on. And it comes up with an idea of what your normal schedule would be for feeding. Now, granted, your storyteller may or may not have you role play out feeding some of the times. If I say I dedicate an hour after I've gotten up to getting some blood each night, maybe I can get it, depending on if I've defined, I've got this sort of area that I know where I can go to. Granted, if I'm far away from there, I'm not going to have the same chance to. Or if I'm not in a situation where I can quickly go and do that, it might come up. But it's just that a basic sort of rule of I have this place that I've defined as my normal area to go feed. And the last question I'm going to talk about today, what motivates your character? Are you looking for more power within vampire society, power within the human world? Are you looking for amassing certain kind of items or wealth? Are you looking to get revenge on someone? Are you looking to, the sky's the limit for how you want to define yourself. Do you want to become the best vampire you can? Do you want to master your craft, so to say, and master your disciplines? Do you want to learn a little bit of every discipline there is? These are all motivations, and defining what might motivate your character in his or her unlife is a great way of saying what kind of way you react to certain situations you get into. So if you get into like a certain sort of like mission or adventure, or something happens, how would I react with what might motivates me? It might tell me, oh, I might try to do this here because it would be in my overall best interests. So let's move on and let's begin to talk about the rules. Let's talk about the different time you can take in a vampire game. So there are different levels of time. Each one represents different things. A turn represents a turn of actions you do. Whatever you do, it's what you do. You like move around, you attack, you do any kind of turn of actions. Now, this could require dice roll. This could also not require dice roll. It's going to depend on the circumstances of what's going on, whether or not a dice roll is important for this turn. After that, we talk about a scene. A scene is a series of turns in a location. So if I set the scene in like an alley, and you're fighting a guy in an alley, that would be the scene. You have your turns taking place within this scene in this dark alley. Now, a bunch of scenes together can make a chapter. A chapter could take place, when we break it down, like I could have this building here, and I could have one scene in that building. Or just because I need to be on like X floor. Or maybe I'm exploring all the different floors and different things could happen on those different floors. I could have a scene on each of those. Then I might call this a chapter. You can have a couple of chapters a session. Usually it's going to be 1 or 2 chapters a session on average, but you could have more depending on sort of the setup you're getting. If you're jumping around a lot, you might have it that maybe it's a lot of little individual scenes that are making up chapters in of themselves, or these scenes could come together to one big chapter that necessarily isn't in the same location. But it's sort of a combination of story elements that are working together, that you have a whole bunch of scenes for that story element makes up a chapter in time. Then of course you have a story. A story is going to be some kind of adventure characters are going to go on. It's a mission. It's something like that. It's like if they're assigned some kind of overarching plot line and they resolve a portion of that plot line, that's going to be a story. That might be like, there's this overarching plot, but there's this like smaller plot here. Like you've got to find this vampire that committed this crime and bring him to the prince. Okay, that's probably your story. And you're going to go on some kind of adventure or some kind of quest, some kind of mission to do that. And you have a certain number of chapters taking place within there, trying to find out where he is, finding him, hunting him down, capturing him, scenes within that, turns within that. Now, there comes to the top end, a chronicle. A chronicle is all the stories of the characters you're running weave together. You might make like one big gigantic plot line be your entire chronicle for these characters. That from A to Z, they're all on the same sort of overarching plot, and that's your entire chronicle. And then all the stories are linked together to make it up. On the other hand, you could have it as a storyteller that each of these stories, each of these little missions are separate, and these characters just go on here and there on different little quests, or again, missions, that each themselves are sort of separated out, but then add together to form this chronicle of the adventures of the characters you're having them run. So when we go back to talking about the scene, we're talking about actions. Actions are what you can do in your turn, as I mentioned before. And of course, again, many are automatic. You don't have to roll. When you do have to roll, you're going to do a check. A check is a set of D10s you're going to roll and see if you can reach a target number or higher on those dice. Each target number is a success. You add the number of successes together. 1 is usually enough to succeed at anything. Sometimes this case may be that you might need more than 1 success. That usually involves going against something else that you're both rolling for successes. But if I'm just doing a task, I would probably only need 1 success, add that target number, and then I've done that action for the D20 roll. There are many actions that you don't need to roll, as I said, but if something's in doubt, that if you're doing an action that it's in doubt that you may or may not succeed on it, then you're going to roll a dice check. Now, to figure out how many dice you're going to be rolling, we have to talk about your traits. Everybody has traits. I've talked about the traits. There's your abilities, your attributes, your backgrounds. Anything you put dots in from 0 to 5 is a trait. Now, granted, when we talk about traits, most of them are going to be from 1 to 5. When you have a 0, whether in certain circumstances, it's either going to be like an ability which start at 0 anyway, that's normal. But other times, when it's anything else, when you're usually talking about a 0, it's exceptional circumstances. Like if you have an attribute that's at a 0, for example, Nosferatu have 0 appearance, that's an exception. Normally you're not going to have 0 in those. So 2 is an average for any traits when you're talking about that. This is really getting into the attributes. Those 2 is going to be average, 5 is the maximum, 1's below average, and again, 0's rare. To figure out how many dice you're rolling, you're usually going to add 2 traits together to figure out how much dice you roll. And the number of dots, each dot represents a 10-sided dice. So if I have a 3 in dexterity, I'm going to roll 3 dice there. On the other hand, if I have something like a 2 in perception, I'm rolling 2 dice there. It will tell you whatever 2 sort of traits add together to equal your entire dice pool. So on a different example, if one of my attribute says I have 4 dice and my ability says I have 3 dice, I would roll 7 dice. Then we're going to talk about the target numbers, the difficulty of the dice roll. The difficulty is represented in a number on the 10-sided dice from 3 to 9 that you have to roll equal to or higher to get a success. Now 6 is going to be the average, 3 is the easiest, 9 is the hardest. There can be exceptions of 2 and 10. 2 is an exception. It would effectively mean you're doing something that's incredibly, incredibly easy, but if there's a chance of failure, failure would mean something horribly negative. So that's why you would roll it. That's the really only real time it would be. Or it's an exception, you know. 2 is an exception to, it's something incredibly easy, but should I fail at this very easy thing, it's a big negative to me, so I'm still going to roll it, even though the chances of me failing are slim to none. On the other hand, 10 being difficult is something that is insanely impossible, and you should not be trying out, because it's like a 1 in a million chance that this plan will succeed sort of thing. Then a difficulty 10 would probably be assigned. Again, these are up to your storyteller what the difficulty will be. Normally, assume it's going to be 6 unless your storyteller tells you differently. Now, again, I mentioned that you can get a number of successes. Normally, 1 is all you need. You can get up to 5 or higher, or you can get all your dice be successes. It just means you're really successful. Sometimes when you're doing an action, the difference between marginally succeeding and superiorly succeeding could actually make a difference. Like if I'm running and jumping across like a gap in 2 buildings, if I marginally succeed, I might still be slowed down, you know, when I reach the edge, because I kind of hit the edge and grab on, because I've barely gotten across. On the other hand, if I like really succeed, I've leapt across, and maybe I can keep running, and maybe I need to keep running, that maybe that cut in a beat because I only got 1 success and got across still, might make the difference. There are times when that occurs, and it's going to be circumstantial. The time when you're really going to need a lot of successes, as I said previously, when you're going against someone else and you're both rolling checks and seeing where you end up. Now, you can automatically succeed on a check if the amount of dice you have in your pool of dice is equal to or greater than the target difficulty number. So if I'm making a check where, let's say I'm doing that leap and the difficulty is 6, I have 6 dice to my check, I can just automatically succeed on it. I can take 1 success and automatically succeed. When you auto-succeed, you only get 1 success. It's the rule. It sort of like says, like, okay, you know, I've auto-succeeded, I've gotten 1 success, I can do it. Again, if it matters about degree of success, you might still want to roll. That would be where it comes in, that you wouldn't want to use automatic successes. You can also automatically succeed by spending a willpower. Now this isn't a permanent willpower. I'll talk about the difference between spending temporary and permanent willpower. But when you spend a willpower, you can say, I'm automatically succeeding on this dice roll. Effectively, you're getting 1 success. So the willpower gives you 1 success at this check. So if it's a check where you only need 1 success, your willpower got you. On the other hand, if it's a check where you might need multiple successes, then you've only got 1 towards that for free with the willpower. Now I'm going to finish up talking about today about the rule of 1 and the rule of 10. The rule of 1 is the more important one here. On your dice roll checks, if you roll a 1 on any of your dice, it cancels out a success. So for every 1 I roll on a check, I've canceled out 1 of my successes. 1s are detrimental to your success, effectively. Now, it can get worse than that. If I have no successes and at least a single 1, and this is after canceling out, because these 2 dice cancel each other. So let's say I rolled 2 successes and 3 1s. The 2 successes we canceled out by 2 of the 1s, and I'd have a single 1 left, and it represents a botch then. That means something terrible happens, something bad. Giving the example of leaping over between 2 buildings. If you'd fail, you'd normally just like so fall, but you'd be falling like this. Maybe if I botched, I tripped on the edge of the building, so now rather than falling feet first, I've tumbled over and I'm falling head first. So it's now more dangerous that I'm falling down there because I'm not in a position to control my fall anymore. Before, maybe I could have either tried to grab the wall or maybe like steered my way slightly towards hitting something that might have broken my fall a little bit. Now, I'm just open for the full hitting the ground because I botched. Now, going on differently, we have the rule of 10. The rule of 10 only comes up if you have a specialization. I talked about specializations with the finishing touches of your characters. If you have a specialization, when you roll a 10, you're allowed to re-roll that dice and possibly get another success. So that 10, it's a success. I can re-roll that dice and see if I get another success. There are times and places where you're going to use that. You might not always want to use the rule of 10 anyway, because the fact is if you roll a 1 on that re-roll, it cancels out the very 10 you just had. It will cancel out a success. There is the chance of that. The more dice you roll, the more chances you have of rolling a 1 anyway. So, again, it's more optional, but it's what would happen when you have that specialization. You re-roll 10s for possible extra successes, for effectively extra dice for every 10 you roll. And you can keep rolling 10s and keep rolling that dice as long as you continue to roll 10s over and over again, which gets statistically ridiculous, but it can happen. So that's it for today. I went over some questions to help finish out the character to your character, and I went over some basic rules of the vampire system. Next time I'm going to dive farther into the rules of the system and let you know about them more. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave them in the comments below. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. It's a great way of showing your support for the channel and the Empire. Please subscribe if you already haven't. We're always looking for more members, more citizens of the Empire, and please share this video if you know anybody that would learn anything from it or would just enjoy watching it. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.